What's up guys, hello to Football Talk here. With this video we kick off the second half of the series, so to speak, where I run through all 32 NFL teams, one division at a time, discussing the draft classes and general approach to roster construction. If this is your first time joining me here, I'll quickly break down every single player each team picked, talk about how they fit within the depth chart and what I project their role to be. Then I'll share some general thoughts on each class, and at the end of each of these episodes, rank the 4 teams against each other in that division, in terms of how well I think they executed their plans, things I agree or disagree with. You can find more detailed strengths and weaknesses on most of the names discussed here over on my site hellotofootballtalk.com, along with my other draft content. There's just like 1 or 2 names in each of these videos I didn't get to in my evaluations, who I'll mention here with a few basic infos. As always, if you enjoy the analysis, please let me know by hitting the like button, and I'd be happy if you're new that you also subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell so you don't miss any more of these. Unfortunately, as we get to the Falcons, Panthers, Saints and Bucks here, to me it's between them and the NFC South, battling for the title as worst or at least most head scratch worthy draft in the division this year. By the way, please keep in mind that I'm recording this about 2 weeks early in case I miss anything that happened since then here. Nevertheless, there's plenty to discuss here, and we start with what has probably been the most debated team coming out of the draft in the Atlanta Falcons, because 8th overall they selected Michael Penix Jr., quarterback Washington, then in the 2nd round 35th overall Ruku Rororo, interior D lineman out of Clemson, 3rd round 74th overall Braylon Trice, edge out of Washington, 4th round 109th overall Brandon Dawlis, interior D lineman out of Oregon, 5th round 143rd overall JT Bertrand, the linebacker out of Notre Dame, and then 3 6th rounders, 186th overall Chase McClellan, running back Alabama, next up with Casey Washington, the Illinois wide receiver, and finally 197th overall Zion Logue, interior D lineman out of Georgia. The first 7 picks of the draft were about as chalk as it gets almost, and then the big shocker with Penix going to Atlanta at 8. Let's just start with the player here first before we get into the situation around it. Rocket launcher attached to his left shoulder for Penix, can hit just about any spot on the field, test tight windows, drop balls into the bucket for his receivers, the whole deal. Doesn't need a whole lot of space to spread the ball all across the field like a garden sprinkler, sort of shooting from his hip at times, and on a lot of occasions stood in until the last possible moment with the rush closing in on him to create big plays. He doesn't always need a clean platform, and you see him deliver throws down the field with his feet not aligned, purely thanks to his arm, which others wouldn't even dream of. Plus he did run a 4.5 at his pro day, to indicate he can do more moving around than how he operated at Washington, going back to his Indiana days when he was a little bit more of a dual threat. You do question how that statuesque pocket passer fares in today's game, since he is a 24-year-old who suffered 4 season-ending injuries in his career, and you need him to protect himself. And whether it's staring down primary reads, or not always being a pinpoint passer, when it's not just placing the ball for his guys to make plays vertically, he definitely benefited from what he had around him at Washington. I do absolutely like the player, and I've actually imagined this fit for a while now with those weapons around him. I'm just concerned about his medical history, and of course this isn't as easy as just looking at the player in a vacuum. You just gave $100 million guaranteed to Kirk Cousins coming off a torn Achilles. If he plays like 3 years for you, now you're looking at 27-year-olds just taking over the starting gig. You kind of almost take away most of the benefits of having a quarterback on his rookie deal. You create internal disagreement and distraction, all while you could have gotten a difference maker right now to help you compete for a championship, because this division is up for grabs pretty much. I broke this down in detail as part of my big draft recap over on my site hellotofootballtalk.com if you're interested, but the opportunity cost and how you arrived at this point, I just don't think that Terry Fontenot and company thought this all the way through from the start. Next up, the young man whose name is almost impossible to spell, in Ruku Rororo, the Clemson D tackle. As surprising as the Penix pick was in the top 10, if we take all the additional circumstances around the quarterbacks out of the equation, what they give up for Rook here is basically at the same level. And we'll get to the player here in a second, because he was really fun to watch, but I had him more so towards the end of the 2nd round, and not only did they take him early, but they moved on 107 spots from the middle of the 3rd round to get up here from pick 43, and with that selection that they handed Arizona in that interaction, the Cardinals took Rutgers cornerback Max Melton, which was Atlanta's biggest need alongside edge rusher, but they didn't address it all. And the irony is not lost on me that GM Terry Fontenot said in his press conference that they didn't want to force a pick at the position or reach when it got to the corner spots, so I'll let you decide yourself what your opinion is on that. As for the player, Rook plays low and with good extension in the run game, being able to press off blockers and create angles to the ball for himself with alignment versatility along the front. As a pass rusher, he can use that leverage to right guards backwards, but also arm over them if they try to quick set on him or sidestep guys after giving a little stutter off the line initially. He has room to improve his ability to read and counter the first steps of the O-line and improve his technique against double teams. And then he needs to improve his reactionary skills as a pass rusher, countering the technique of interior protectors and figuring out how to give them trouble throughout games instead of just trying to land moves. I may disagree with the value and what they prioritized here, but I did like Rook a lot still. He'll start alongside Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata most likely, two really good guys to learn from some of the skills that I described. Starting from a base of a supreme athlete, we're looking at a player with a relative athletic score of nearly 9.9. I don't think the consistency may quite be there as a rookie, but the potential to line up in multiple spots and be a difference maker down the road is clearly there, as the rest of that group is aging. They do address edge in the third round with Braylon Trice from Washington, after many suspected they could take the first one off the board at 8th overall. Trice has some real violence in those hands and can set the tone at first contact in the run game, especially if working against tight ends. Rushes the passer as if his hair was on fire, throwing out a variety of hand combats, stabbing at the chest of blockers, and going through them if needed. Led the country in pressures each of the past 2 years with that more power profile based approach, where his reactionary skills are actually really good to win in the secondary phase of the rush. He peeks inside and loses discipline in his run fits too often, without the suddenness to disengage and make plays. And he's an average at best athlete for the position, where his speed up the arc isn't optimal, and he showed up nearly 30 pounds lighter at the combine than the 270 plus he was listed at Washington, yet didn't make up for it in the way he tested. So a somewhat limited player maybe in terms of his upsides, but I do believe he can help the pass rush pretty much right away. No nonsense in his approach, well stay true to his rush lanes. Now if only he could do the same to set the edge on early downs. He'll probably be battling Lorenzo Carter for that second starting spot alongside Arnold Ebiketie, and I think he can be someone for defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake, who coached him very early on at UW, who can move inside on passing downs as well. Speaking about the interior D-line, we've got Brandon Dolas from Oregon at the top of day 3. Packs the length and strength to sort of bench press blockers and create leverage on the gap and run defense, but he was also used quite a bit slanting across the face of linemen and creating disruption, being able to swipe away their reach and get his hands on the ball carrier. He's able to extend those long arms and create movement on the bull rush, but he can also land some high swims, and when his hands and hips are connected, there are some impressive reps from him. Doesn't consistently keep the outside arm free and stays ready to quickly disengage when the ball's coming his way, while as a pass rusher, there's too much wasted movement, trying to peek at the quarterback and not actually get around opponents with a refined plan, which really showed up during Senior Bowl practices. I think the lack of a defined role hurt him to some degree, and maybe there's some injury concerns that I'm not aware of, since there was stuff out there that he may sneak his way into the second round. I think this is a lot closer to where I had him, since I questioned how effective he can be and how to maximize his potential. More in the mold of a Zach Harrison as the big long D end, who can play at the 4-eye or head up on the tackle. Similar thoughts to Rook as we look at the future. Then in the 5th round, Notre Dame linebacker JT Bertrand, who I actually thought was the better among the two that they had with the Fighting Irish, after the Cowboys selected the other one at the end of the 3rd round in Maris Leofau. For Bertrand, really sound run defender who trusts his eyes and quickly IDs pulling guards, flowing to the football, while being pretty sturdy at 235 pounds and timing up well how he swipes away the hands of blockers without driving his legs through the ball carrier. Makes his presence felt as a hook dropper without allowing himself to get moved by bait routes, and he was highly effective as a pass rusher last season, being able to flat out run through backs in protection but also mix it up a bit. Not as effective against vertical runs and in moments where he has to actually stack and trap blockers coming at him straight on, since he only has 30.5-inch arms, and I don't think he has tremendous awareness in zone while struggling to smoothly transition in space at times. I did like Bertrand quite a bit in an otherwise underwhelming linebacker class, because his tape was very clean and he has great leadership qualities. Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson will start for this team, and they have Nate Landman as a solid backup that they found as a UDFA a couple of years ago. But they'll have a couple of decisions to make next offseason, and Bertrand makes a lot of sense with how the previous regime at least used the backers as blitzers, and what we've seen from head coach Raheem Morris recently. Which gets us to the 3 6th rounders, starting with Alabama running back Chase McClellan, good sized runner at 5'11", 210 pounds, understands very well how to get second level defenders and safeties either stepping down or leaning the wrong way, will sort of dip and weave around defenders, but then when it's time, load up that shoulder to set the tone on contact and bowl forwards, averaging over 3.5 yards after contact last season, and he has reliable hands even with passes off his frame, lacks the instant acceleration to split linebackers, and then the top gear to do so against safeties when he gets a chance, and in the pass game, he doesn't give you a ton right now, not super twitchy after the catch, and needs to do a better job of deciphering the pass rush and identifying the biggest threat when he's in pass protection. They still have Tyler Algier for a couple of years as the hammer to complement Bijan Robinson. McClellan isn't quite at that level, but a similar style of downhill runner who can take on some of that load eventually. Very next selection, Illinois wide receiver Casey Washington. Definitely the lesser of the two Illinois receivers in my opinion compared to Isaiah Williams, who I already talked about as a potential impact undrafted free agent for Detroit in the piece a couple of weeks ago. Washington is the bigger, faster of the two at around 6'1", 200 pounds. He ran a 4.45 at his pro day, which definitely helped him, and you like the physicality to create separation against previously tight coverage, but his ability to actually create separation as a route runner, freeze the feet of defenders, and be efficient at the break point certainly the things to be desired. Has good hands, and there were some bright moments during Shrine Bowl week, but you also saw him get locked up by guys at times, and while the Illinois offense didn't translate a whole lot to receiving production, he only had just over 800 yards prior to a good redshirt senior season across his first 4 years. I don't see how he's making that roster over Drake London, Daniel Mooney, Rondale Moore, Ray McLeod, and Kadero Hodge, unless he carries 6 receivers or he's a fixture on the practice squad who they bring up for special team purposes. And finally Zion Logue, the Georgia nose tackle. Really not much to say here about him, 6'5", 315 pounds, NFL ready body, and was a rotational player for the Bulldogs with some solid athletic testing, can only space pretty well in the run game with heavy hands and the ability to anchor against double teams. I just didn't see any pop of the ball, the quickness to work off blocks and make plays, with essentially no third down value. 52 tackles across 50 career games and just 1.5 sacks reflect that. While the different types of players, Atlanta did already take a couple of interior D linemen earlier, and I'm not sure if you expect this guy to actually make the roster, since you expect David Onyemata as the starting nose to be a pretty high snap guy for you on early downs. So I would have rather taken a shot at a developmental corner for example, since they didn't target that clear position of need at all. The big key of course is how Atlanta handles the quarterback room going forward. There are a lot of questions now with how they've set themselves up, and what I'm really interested in. Kirk maybe isn't quite ready week 1, or Penix lights it up in practice leading up to the season. What if they end up with him being a guy right now, because he is 24 and not one of those developmental guys? Then you carry that massive cap number and a disgruntled veteran quarterback, or even if it happens during the season he has a stretch of a couple of bad games. And what really annoys me, you want to say that you're not going to draft this early again next year? Cool. You literally picked at 8 the year prior, and then 4th overall the year before that. So as much as I believed in this team this past season, and I think that the favorites to win the division, and I think that the favorites to win the division this fall with a soft schedule, you're making a lot of assumptions, including Penix not being there at 8 initially. I also wasn't a big fan of the trade up for Rook, even if I liked the player, understanding the value of those resources you gave up. Tri-Stalls and Bertrands, all guys in the front 7 defensively that went a few spots later than where I personally valued them, so good there. McClellan I can get on board with as a number 3 back, but not sure if either one of those 2 guys after that actually makes the roster. I only know them both. So I really didn't love what Atlanta did here in the first year with that new regime. They certainly left a mark, but it better work out for them. That brings us to the Carolina Panthers, who in the first round, 32nd overall, selected Xavier Leggett, wide receiver South Carolina, 2nd round, 46th overall, Jonathan Brooks, running back Texas, 3rd round, 72nd overall, Trevin Wallace, linebacker Kentucky, 4th round, 101st overall, Jatavian Sanders, tight end Texas, 5th round, 157th overall, Charles Smith-Wade, cornerback Washington State, 6th round pick 200, Jaden Crumedy, interior D lineman Mississippi State, and then the 7th round, 240th overall, Michael Barrett, the linebacker out of Michigan. Obviously Carolina didn't originally own a first round pick due to trading up to number 1 overall last year for Bryce Young. The Panthers did move up 1 spot however from the top of day 2, and there's some value of course in securing the potential of a 5th-year option, but that compared to the risk you're running of the Bills actually getting your guy instead, I don't think is worth 59 spots down to pick 200. As for Leggett, intriguing physical profile at 6'1", 220 pounds with 4.39 speed, but has come up for special teams and really enforces that size as a blocker. Had a massive breakout season this past year, with the ability to gain speed for cuts a lot of times, is flexible to plug passes that aren't perfectly on target, and he really excels at using that frame also like his rebounding to shield the ball from the next closest defender. Plus then he's like a wild horse, with defenders trying to jump on top of him, along with the pull-away speed when he has a lane to bang his head on the goalpost. He does lack refinement or diversity in his release package, while not being the most precise route runner overall, with almost everything in South Carolina being horizontal or vertical. Some passes over the middle, the adjustments he makes to the ball aren't very natural. I can explain the late breakout profile, looking at his personal situation, and him being slowed down by injuries. I think the way he can move with that big frame, and how it benefits him with the ball in the air or in his hands, give him a solid baseline to build upon as he continues to work on his craft. Carolina traded for Deontay Johnson from the Steelers as a pure route runner. 34-year-old Adam Thielen now isn't one of the most targeted receivers in the league, and you have Jonathan Mingo there as an early second rounder from a year ago, as a somewhat similar profile, even with less built to play outside. I think Leggett can play the X or as a big slot, but optimally, you don't want to put too much on his plate early on and fabricate touches to some degree. Then in the second, you get Texas running back Jonathan Brooks. Funny how they got here, because they originally held pick 39 from the Giants as part of the Brian Burns trade, yet they allowed the Rams to move up 13 spots in exchange for a 5th and a 2nd round the next year, only they moved back up 6 spots for the cost of a couple of 5s in this class. So a star player involved, plus then we get a couple of overpays with the first on the Rams end being quite massive. Looking at Brooks as a player, really smooth runner who's able to make efficient transitions and get through tight creases without slowing his feet, even though he can slow them down when needed. Great 10 to 20 acceleration, rarely allows defenders to get a clear shot at him in condensed areas, and then he always seems to have a plan one-on-one with his safety. And he has natural hands along with the awareness where defenders are closing in from, being able to make guys miss in the flats routinely. He doesn't have the type of juice to split linebackers, or the long speed to turn explosives into touchdowns regularly. And while he does gain plenty of yardage after contact, Brooks isn't somebody who'll go straight for a linebacker in the hole when necessary, or drag guys on his back. Brooks being RB1 despite coming off the torn ACL speaks to what he showed in less than a full year as a starter at Texas, taking over for Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. He will barely turn 21 years old once the season rolls around, and has the ability to turn himself into a pretty complete back. If healthy, I think he immediately starts over Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard, where he may not be a major home run threat like Hubbard to some degree, but he'll bleed out runs and set them up with 2nd and 5 a lot more regularly. 3rd round, Kentucky linebacker Trevor Wallace. Carolina did recoup a 5th rounder here from the Jets, as they dropped down 7 spots from where those guys got Western Kentucky's Malachi Corley, since they already had the big time run after catch receiver in a bigger package and Leggett secured themselves. Old school size at 6'1", 237 pounds, but with new school athleticism and speed. That explosiveness shows up in short areas, where he can shoot through creases and thump running backs in the hole for quick run stuffs. Easy move and zone coverage with the wheels to carry tight ends down the seams, but can also be a piece in the pressure looks, where his closing burst as an add-on rusher or looper can really shine. You do see Wallace take a false step or shuffle the wrong way quite regularly, where he needed his speed to bail him out, and whether it's being pulled up by play action or getting occupied by guys sitting down routes in front of him, you can get the ball over his head quite often. I do think this is a run and chase backer with the potential to be an impact starter at the next level eventually. They did bring in a steady presence in Josie Jewell next to Shaq Thompson, who they brought back for one more year, but maybe in 2025 they make that switch and Wallace can fly around for them if he get his eyes in the right places. I would have preferred them to get him around later, but you can flip him and the next pick in your head, where it suddenly looks really good, as they went back to Texas and selected the versatile tight end Jatavian Sanders, a former D lineman in high school who can fire out of a 3-point stance and roll his hips through contact in an offset alignment, and provides great leg drive in the run game generally, has easy acceleration of the line and the speed to threaten the seams or run away from linebackers trying to match him on benders, with the focus to hold on to the ball through contact. And then he's a run after catch specialist who can win with lateral movement, has that instant burst once the ball touches his hands, and can drive forward through awaiting safeties. His hand placement and ability to square up defensive backs from detached alignments do need work as a blocker, while he doesn't quite have the size of someone playing in line, and he'll need to grow more ways to freeze the feet of defenders, set up his breaks, and create separation as a true route runner. But to get him at the top of day 3, when I thought he was a top 50 player, that's outstanding. I think he's another very useful piece for that offense, as they build out their receiving corps around Bryce Young. They have Ian Thomas as a more traditional Y, so they can put Sanders off the ball, leak him out into the flats, let him thread in the middle of the field. I think he can turn into what Jonnu Smith or Gerald Everett have been at the brightest moments. A little quicker now on the 3 other day 3 guys. First up with Charles Smith-Wade, the Washington State corner. With below average long speed and height, I thought many teams might look at him as a pure nickel with matchup limitations, Needs to be more assertive with the 9 stack position vertical routes, and did lose quite a few battles during Senior Bowl. But what I love about him is the short-term memory and the way he continues to battle back. Very springy, like what he can be in a match zone-based defense, where he can read and close on routes in front of him. Really good understanding for when to fall off routes, find work and compete at the catch points. And then I think he tracks the ball well and has no issues throwing his body around in run defense. Carolina did move Dante Jackson almost as a 1-for-1 trade for Deontay Johnson. They did sign Dane Jackson, sorry with the very confusing names here, and Troy Hill, most likely as the starters on the field side and at nickel. But they do have very little behind it, and I think Smith-Wade gives them flexibility backing up both of those guys. Then Jaden Cromedy out of Mississippi State, 6'4", 300-pound interior D lineman who defends the run with good pad level and has some real knockback power in his hands. Continues to strain and work for angles to get to the ball, while as a pass rusher, he does get up the field with the dip and rip, along with having a knack for pulling blockers off himself once he feels them getting off balance. Average athlete across the board, with a lack of quick twitch explosiveness however, generally needs to do a better job of attacking one half of blockers, tends to lose track of the ball at times, and he needs to develop a more effective and diverse rush plan. I think restocking the D-line with how shallow it looks like beyond the starting 3, this is a pick that they kinda needed to make, and I could see Cromedy play up to like 300 snaps as a rookie, as long as they don't bring in another veteran later on. And finally, Michigan linebacker Michael Barrett. The Panthers moved on 62 spots actually here as part of the trade that got them wide receiver Deontay Johnson, but Dante Jackson going to Pittsburgh. But I actually prefer Barrett straight up over Logan Lee, who the Steelers picked up at the top of the 6th round with the pick they got from them. Hard-nosed linebacker who will crash into linemen and funnel the ball towards his teammates, sturdy and proactive with his hands in those close combats, while being disciplined with staying ready for cutbacks. Does getting around vertically a lot better than you might expect in coverage, where he has some really nice reps turning and running with tight ends down the seams, and then he can punch and pull pass protectors in order to get to the quarterback. Not the easiest or most dynamic mover overall, who needs to diagnose the play early, lacks the speed to run people down towards the sideline, and will get outflanked by speed into the flats at times, and I don't look at him as much of a matchup play in coverage. But as one of the final picks of the draft, someone I believe can jump in as backup linebacker on early downs and will give you everything he's got on special teams. That's a really good value pickup instead of trying to search for one of these guys on the undrafted free agent market. The theme of this offseason for the Panthers clearly has been, how do we make Bryce Young work? The trade for Deontay Johnson, paying the new guard duo more than $33 million on average, and now drafting a wide receiver, running back and tight end who could become significant pieces of this attack around the second-year quarterback. So from that perspective, I don't mind new head coach Dave Canales wanting to do everything in his powers to support the former number 1 overall pick, similar to how he resurrected Baker Mayfield's career this past season. I thought the move up for Brooks in the second was a little aggressive. I thought Walls was about around early, even if I expected him to go around here based on the physical upside, and I thought there might have been better options at corner still available, but we're talking about a 5th round pick here. If they didn't give up extra darts at the board for a team that was at the bottom of the league, yet didn't have the 1st overall pick to show for it, I would have felt better about this, since they needed to add more competition at other spots too. But all in all, they did accomplish what they prioritized in terms of building an infrastructure around the young quarterback that he can succeed in. Next up though, we've got the New Orleans Saints, who in the 1st round, 14th overall, selected Talisi Fuanga, offensive tackle Oregon State, 2nd round 41st overall Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback Alabama, then more than 100 spots later, 3 5th rounders, 150th overall Spencer Rattler, quarterback South Carolina, 170th overall Bob Means, wide receiver Pittsburgh, and 5 picks later Jalen Ford, the linebacker out of Texas. In the 6th round, 199th overall Christian Boyd, interior D lineman Northern Iowa, and in the 7th round, 239th overall Josiah Ezerim, offensive tackle Eastern Kentucky. Starting with Fuanga, the Oregon State tackle, a true rogue grader in the run game, who latches his hands into guys on the edge and escorts them to the sideline regularly. Whether he wants to run inside zone or duo, he can blow open lanes and combos, and as big as this guy is at 6'6", 325 pounds, he can really get out and bowl over people in space. As a pass protector, he keeps his pads square to the line of scrimmage for as long as he can, with a good first kick and generally well coordinated footwork, while showing the ability to use his hands independently and small power rush attempts. Lacks the kind of foot quickness and or stride length to get to his landmarks against wide rushers at times, and barely cracks 33-inch arms, and you see him overset edge defenders on drive blocks at times, allowing them to backdoor those blocks. But really not a whole lot to complain about. The best run block and tackle in the country over the past 2 seasons, has continued to improve as a pass protector. Some people see him also as a guard. I think he can kick ass at right tackle, which initially the idea was that he needed to get someone playing on the left side, in place of what is turning out to be a first round bust in Trevor Penning. But now with the reports about Ryan Ramczyk and his degenerate knee issues, they desperately needed help on both edges, and Fuanga is ready to step in right away. Then in the second round, Kool-Aid McKinstry, the Alabama cornerback. The Saints of course couldn't just stick and pick with the first two selections in this draft, so they moved up 4 spots in exchange for a 5th and 6th rounder going to Green Bay, which is perfectly fine for me, as they secured themselves what was my number 3 corner in Kool-Aid. One to play that position with how natural he is at anticipating routes and a comfort at blasting receivers, being able to play different techniques in press, has a great feel for the timing of concepts and when routes are off the table, and generally does well to maintain leverage in zone assignments, while being able to squeeze down space to nearby routes. Not just a cover corner by any means though, condensing space off the edge, arriving low, and bringing people to the ground pretty reliably. Gets unnecessarily grabby during the stem of intermediate route especially, and I question his top end speed as well as when physical receivers are able to attack his chest with that higher center of gravity. But a perfect fit for what the Saints expect out of the corners, with how much press man they like to run. I'm not sure if they really needed him, since they already had the best corner trio in the league outside of Cleveland last season probably, between Marshall Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, and Alontae Taylor. But we've heard rumors since then of them shopping Lattimore, coming off a strong season with 2 years left on his deal. So maybe they get some solid return here, while still having made that value selection McKinstry and having gotten younger. No picks in the 3rd or 4th rounds, but 3 in the 5th, starting with South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler, who I outlined as a definite steal in my big draft recap, more so based on the NFL dooming him for starring in a documentary series and judging his maturity as a 17-year-old, which once again is just ridiculous, and guys being lazy at their jobs. He's gone through a lot of adversity as a former number 1 overall recruit, getting benched at Oklahoma, transferring to South Carolina, and battling through some suboptimal circumstances, and he still has a lot of the things that made him so intriguing coming out of high school. Legitimately special arm, where he can teleport the ball to either sideline or make insane throws without a clean platform, falling away and flicking passes with his wrist. While there can still be some chaos to his game, he has clearly worked on calming his eyes and feet as a pocket passer, has become more willing to just throw the ball away when necessary, and has that slipperiness to him to get away from pressure. Not always a pinpoint passer, and there are still certainly some questionable decisions on tape, trying to beat driving defenders with the throw, and he has some of that Baker Mayfield illness where he overestimates his ability to get away from the rush at times, but should have never been there. I thought the gap between him and JJ McCarthy as my QB6 was smaller than Michael Penix as my 5th ranked guy. Obviously he has a steep mountain to climb as a 5th rounder, but with how Derek Carr performed and behaved otherwise last season, I would not be shocked if Rattler ends up starting for them at some point this season and beyond that. I'll go quicker now on these last 4 names, starting with Bob Means from Pittsburgh. Good sized receiver at 6'1", 210 pounds with low 4.4 speed and some hops. Has the play strength to fight through jersey tugs and gain positioning on guys, but also come to abrupt stops after pushing guys vertically. Has continued to work on his catching skills, only dropping 2 of 43 catchable passes last season, with good concentration and strong hands, along with good start-stop skills after the grab. Kind of a wonky type of route runner and a little bit of a drift in his stems, lacks any real deceptive elements to his routes, and too often allows defenders to slide in front of him. Doesn't always attack the ball at its earliest window, or work back to it with the needed urgency, and not a super invested run blocker. So even for a Saints team without a lot of proven commodities at receiver, beyond Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, I personally am a big A.T. Perry believer, but still for Means more of a low-end role player. Then Jalen Ford from Texas, 6'2", 240-pound linebacker with 29 career starts, disciplined run defender who keeps his shoulders square, does well to gain ground laterally, tracking plays from the backside, but can also punch and step around linemen near the point of attack. While in coverage, he showcases good spatial awareness and has several excellent reps pinning the near arm and carrying tight ends down the seams, and he has some experience rushing off the edge to good effect. He does allow eye candy to pull him off his landmarks defending the run. He could still improve how he passes routes and doesn't just drop to a spot, and he ends up leaving his feet too much as a tackler, leading to a 14.5% miss rate for his career with the Longhorns, but certainly later than I expected. We'll have to see how exactly they work in Willie Gay Jr. alongside Demario Davis and Pete Werner. They don't really have anybody else other than a matchup player for passing downs in NFC South, so maybe Ford is your long-term replacement for Davis. At worst he's a quality backup and core special team I would think. Love the Christian Boyd pick, the D tackle of Northern Iowa, where Ford could have easily gone like 50-60 spots earlier. Presents that dense build at 6'2", 320 pounds, comes off the ball low and with purpose, ready to strike with his hands. has the body control and feel for how to find leverage points like a wrestler, but can also arm over lunging blockers. And then I was really impressed first when I saw him put guys on skates during Shrine Bowl week, which showed up regularly when I've watched his tape as well, along with the impressive flexibility working crossface moves. Much more concerned with coming off the ball and winning the first phase of the contact, rather than IDing run schemes and keeping his outside arm free at this point. And if he doesn't sell out for the bull rush, too often you'd see linemen be able to get into his chest and passing downs. I love this behind Kalen Saunders and Nathan Shepard, as I could see Boyd and Brian Brzee, the late first rounder last year, be the starting duo on the interior for the future. And finally, Josiah Ezerim, the Eastern Kentucky tackle. I did not get to or believe I even had access to his tape. I did watch him during Shrine Bowl practices, where he had some issues shifting his weight too far towards the outside foot and made himself vulnerable to quick moves up the B gap. But you did see him hunker down against power with a wide base and right edge rushes off track when he did get to the edges of his frame. Only became a starter a month into the 2022 season after transitioning from the defensive line, but was a second team FCS All-American last year already then at right tackle. Nearly 6'6", 330 pounds, above an 85-inch wingspan, and tested well. For a team that drafted Fuanga up high to slot into one of those tackle spots, now you have this developmental option who can pay off later on down the line. I don't mind that at all, even though I can't really speak on the play otherwise. All in all, I really liked what the Saints did here despite limited resources. They get one of the tackle spots locked down at least for a team that really needed to address those. They find good value with my number 3 corner in the second round, who really fits what they want to do, and potentially gives them freedom to move on from one of the guys in exchange for more future draft capital. They didn't take one of those guys they typically reach for because he's their cup of tea. And then after sitting out over 100 draft slots, they came back and get a quarterback I think is starting qualities in the league, who gives them a great shot for the future, along with a pretty strong day 3 in general, finding guys who could eventually enter the lineup for them. I thought they could have added one more safety, and I would have liked some other receivers over Bob Means, but generally I think they did pretty well here with the state of the roster, where they have a bunch of aging veterans, some young guys trying to establish themselves in the league, and even a quarterback they take a shot at getting younger and cheaper, without it their Carr experience has gone so far. Bringing us to a final team for today, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In the first round, 26th overall, they selected Graham Barton, interior O-lineman out of Duke. Second round, 57th overall, Chris Braswell, edge Alabama. Couple of third rounders, 89th overall, Tyke Smith, safety Georgia. And 3 picks later, Jalen McMillan, wide receiver Washington. In the fourth round, 125th overall, Bucky Irving, running back Oregon. And then after sitting out nearly 100 picks, 220th overall in the 6th round, Elijah Klein, interior O-lineman UTEP. And in the 7th round, 246th overall, Devin Kolb, tight end Washington. For Barton, an all-ACC player at left tackle, but expected to move inside with shorter arms, and how well his skill set projects to the interior. Explosive out of his stance to dig defensive linemen out of the gap with a tenacious attitude, while being fundamentally sound with the way he squares up his blocks. Total ass kicker when used on pulls, where he gets on his horse to get those spots, and arrives there with plenty of thump. Quick out of his stance in pass pro, and agile laterally to mirror pass rushers, with a good understanding for the depth of the pocket and rush angles. Can get a little too aggressive with his forward lean and end up slipping off contact if he has one hand swiped away. And the grip strength is definitely a plus as a pass protector, but he needs to learn when to let go in order to avoid holding calls. But a pro-ready player, even if he'll be playing guard or center for the Bucs, will immediately boost the run game as part of a team that was near the bottom of the league in terms of efficiency over the last couple of years. I could see them stick with Robert Hainsey at center and plug in Barton to his left, or the rookie taking over at the pivot, and instead of Hainsey, Bet Bredesen competes for left guard. Either way, now with this guy plus Cody Mogg, you have some nasty guys up front who excel on the move. Was surprised he lasted this long with how tremendous he performed at his pro day. Then in the second round, the Alabama edge Chris Braswell, who has definitely improved his ability to stand up and anchor against drive blocks at the point of attack in the run game. Explosive up the field and violent with his hands as someone who excelled at converting speed to power, or circle around tackles with the rip move. And then you like the way he can stick his foot in the ground as a looper, or just lining up inside and condensing the pocket. He brings some versatility in passing downs that way. While his run defense did certainly improve this past season, he didn't actually start a lot for Bama, who preferred putting a big body base end on the field instead, especially with how he struggled against combos with the tackle and tight end on the front side of wide zone. And he's more of a linear rusher without the ability to win the first phase in the pass game, as he reduces his surface area or throws in sidestep moves. Definitely not on the level of Dallas Turner, who played across from him, and I thought he was overrated coming into this past season based on potential, but I did see areas where Braswell improved, even if there's still room upwards for him. Tampa letting Shaq Barrett walk in free agency, they hope Joe Tryon-Shoyinka does finally break through in the final year of his rookie deal, and Randy Gregory can give them some juice and passing downs. I think Braswell seals the field quite a bit as part of the rotation, playing around 500 snaps potentially. Next up, Tyke Smith, the versatile defensive back from Georgia, wants to attack downhill against the run, where he can toss his high slot receivers as a nickel, but also run the alley from depth. Deciphers well through route patterns and zone coverage, with a good feel for targets coming in behind him, and when he has a chance to drive on the ball, he can dislodge targets from it. And his numbers in man coverage last season were just insane, as he took over the star role in the slot for the Bulldogs, with his route anticipation, length and physicality to stick like glue to guys. Doesn't always take the greatest care of his contained responsibility, where running backs can give him a little dip inside and then win the corner on him, and he needs to improve as a tackler, wrapping up consistently in the open field, missing nearly 15% of attempted tackles during his time in Athens. I thought as a pure nickel, Smith was up there with just about anybody, outside of Cooper DeJean from Iowa and Michigan's Mike Sainristil still. He does have somewhat of a medical history, and it'll be interesting what the Bucs' plan with him will be. Christian Izien performed very well in the slot for them as an undrafted free agent last season, but they did also bring back Jordan Whitehead to pair up with Antoine Winfield Jr. at safety, who they just locked up on a long-term deal. So maybe Smith starts as part of the big nickel package, but I think they'll want to find a way to keep him on the field. And 3 picks later, the third Washington receiver, Jalen McMillan. Tampa got this extra third rounder from the team that actually knocked them out of the playoffs in the Lions when they sent over Carlton Davis to them, along with 6th rounders this and next year. McMillan projects really well as a power slot, already running option routes, stick notes, etc., and can just win those two-way goes on the release. Shows good flexibility adjusting to passes, excellent focus tracking the ball down the field, and the ability to elevate for catches over his head. Plus then the fluidity transitioning upfield after the catch, and the shiftiness in space, more than you'd expect from a guy with good size. I'd like to see better pacing early in the route, and less lost time with starting his feet, while the final gear is somewhat lacking. And he features a minuscule contested catch rate of 20% for his career to actually win through contact. I think this was fine value for McMillan, who I was higher on coming into this past season before missing time, and Jalen Polk emerging as the number 2 option alongside Rome Odunze for the Huskies. Trey Palmer did have his flashes last season as a rookie, but not sure how long they want to keep Chris Godwin around still, so I think we could see this guy quite a bit as a rookie and eventually take over the starting gig inside. Bringing us to Oregon running back Bucky Irving, very efficient mover, whether he has to be explosive laterally on jump cuts, pointed to and make sharp cuts, evade diving defenders, or just cross guys up once he gets to the second level. Forced a 37% missed tackle rate last season, where he excels at not allowing defenders to get a straight shot at him, while keeping himself alive as a runner by spinning off glancing shots and pulling his legs out of the grasp of tacklers. And then he was very effective as a pass catcher for Oregon, ripping off some massive chunks on simple swing routes. Maybe a bit tiptoey as a runner, where he gets banged down violently by big hitters, and it's just an underwhelming physical profile at 5'9", a good 190 pounds, with 4.55 speed, and generally the explosiveness numbers he put up at the combine, along with very short arms to limit his catch radius. This was my number 7 running back, and I think someone who pairs up pretty well with Rashad White, where he can be a change of pace option, as someone who put up way more explosives than his profile would indicate. After taking a break from nearly 100 spots, they take Elijah Klein, the UTEP guard. I was mostly just watching passing by as I was evaluating his quarterback Gavin Hardison, but he did look pretty good from the limited exposure, provides relentless leg drive, and consistently was able to ride people diagonally on inside zone, widening and pushing guys into the defensive backfield simultaneously. Had an elite PFS pass protecting grade last season, and there was some nice flashes of passing off twists and cross action when I watched him. Didn't test very well, but makes sense as a fit for Tampa, looking for the smaller guards, who has plenty of experience as a puller. And finally, Devin Cobb from Washington, who ran the 4th fastest 40-yard dash time among all tight ends over the last 20 years at 4.47. That speed shows up at times on tape when allowed to attack vertically or turning up the field after catching a ball in the flats, massively cut down his drop rate recently, and he does have some highlight reel above the rim grabs to his name, while as a blocker, he's best at leading the way out to the perimeter. Clearly lacks the functional strength to be an asset as an inline blocker, where he lunges way too much. The route running acumen isn't where you want it to be for a 6th year senior, and he definitely has some clap attack tendencies, even if the drop rate was down recently. So I think he's battling to make that roster with a more skilled receiver in Payne Durham, as they have a pretty good all-around start in Kid Otten, who actually got from the Huskies as well, and the primary blocker in Cokeeft, who can also play some fullback for them. Overall, I thought the Bucs did pretty well addressing areas of need without going out of their way in terms of where they could find value. The trio at the top with Barton, Braswell and Smith could be in Tampa Bay for the next decade, and I wouldn't be shocked. McMillan gives you flexibility at receiver for the future. Irving is a quality number 2 back who gives you a little more short area burst, as they have to ultimately make a decision with Rashad White. And the final 2 guys realistically are battling for roster spots. But I thought General Manager Jason Light stayed within the confines of what this team values and understood areas where they could become vulnerable, especially with Barton being a home run to get that rushing attack back on track. As they brought back Baker Mayfield and Big Mike, we knew that they're committed to making this thing work short term, as they still have a few pieces from that Super Bowl run remaining, but some young guys on defense have really emerged. We'll see if they eventually have to overhaul some things and look into the quarterback position, but none of them making the divisional rounds, and in the draft the top 6 guys were gone within the first 12 picks already. This once again brings us to the draft ranking segment. I want to repeat that this is purely based on what teams did during the draft, and not how they stack up overall currently. At the top we have the Saints, who thankfully didn't reach for one of their guys, especially when I think about these bigger edge defenders they've consistently targeted over the first 2 days of the draft. Got a starting tackle out of it, which they really needed, my number 3 corner in Kool-Aid, who excels at exactly what they want to do. If Spencer Rattler ends up starting any games for them and gives them options down the road, that could be a phenomenal 5th rounder. And then they added some more depth across the defense or the rest of day 3. The more I looked at this list of names, the more I liked it, where it's them and the next team that didn't actually reach on players I thought, but they got a couple more guys late that I think can contribute. The Bucs are second, once again solid value across all 3 days. Love what Graham Barton provides as a physical presence with positional flexibility along the O-line. They address the pass rush and coverage departments on the defense with guys from big SEC programs after that, who are both coming off the best seasons. They got contributors at wide receiver and running back who don't need much time before they can throw them out there on the field. I think they found a nice balance between identifying guys who can be part of this run with Baker Mayfield in a still fairly weak NFC South, while many of those guys could be there in the long run. Didn't love the value on the guys the Panthers took up top necessarily. I did outline how this is all part of making last year's first overall pick Bryce Young regain confidence and surround him with the pieces to succeed, and the new leadership of Dave Canales. It did come at the cost of maybe not always getting the best guys on the board, but nothing egregious. If they get their owner to stop being a punk, and the guys actually running the show in terms of the ball they play, that's an interesting young team, even if they're still a couple of years away. And the Falcons to me have to be at the bottom. All the complications that come along with the panic selection at 8th overall. When you could have a chokehold on this division in the near future. I do really like his fit with the weapons in that offense long term, but I just disagree with the approach that they took here. Massive capital spent trading up for Ruko Rororo early in the second, when I thought that was early anyway, and they really needed a corner, which they didn't address at all. They did find a couple of solid picks early on D3, but I don't like the shots that they took after that necessarily either. So I don't like to hand out ladder grades, but I'd probably give this a D as the lowest of any team in the league. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this latest edition of the Divisional Draft and Roster Review series. If you did, why don't you let me know by hitting the thumbs up button. And if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing for future videos. The comment section is always open for feedback and healthy debate. I have even more detailed scouting reports on a bunch of players discussed today over on my site hello@footballtalk.com, and feel free to follow me on social media for all of my other content, ideas, thoughts on what's happening around the game. Just check out the links down in the description. We'll of course be hopping back over to the AFC, looking at a suddenly really interesting collection of teams between the Texans, Colts, Jaguars and Titans on Friday. Hope to see you all back for that. So until then, see you later. Peace!